So I'm very happy to present this last presentation of the day, and especially in this session about the preservation and complex objects. And I think I will bring here another view about the OIS that has just been challenged. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Okay. Do you hear me now, correctly now? Okay. This presentation will be maybe present another point of view about the OIS just challenged by our colleagues of the archives of the Netherlands. Okay. So what's the outline? I will explain briefly why we do web preservation, so the reasons of our project, then who we are, with briefly the background about the Publications Office and our preservation activities. Then I will go about the facets of the web preservation, so the various questions that we asked ourselves. And then I will conclude with the next steps. So first chapter, why web preservation? This is a slide that is usually shown by my colleague who is doing effectively the web preservation when she tries to explain to people who don't know what it is, what are the steps that are included it. So there is the selection, crawling, harvest, quality control, and access given to the files, so the web archiving files. And the very last step is usually the long-term preservation, which is sometimes forgotten. So in this presentation, I will make a difference between web archiving that includes the steps 1 to 5 and the long-term preservation, which is the step, which is the fact of preserving the WARC files produced by the web archiving. So what was our objective? So the Publications Office looks at regularly at the risks. So we are in a world that is changing with the climate change, the war, so the risks are increasing. And we thought that our business continuity plan should be enhanced, and we thought that it's time to take all our ARC and WARC files and to put them safe in our long-term preservation system in order to be able to deploy our activity on our own if it was needed. But we wanted to do it safely or properly, so ensuring bit preservation, of course, but with everything that goes together with correct long-term preservation, so we should ensure authenticity, integrity, reliability, and usability with the 2 copies in different geographical areas, the preservation actions about fixity, provenance, access rights, against obsolescence or corruption of files, and the documentation about the content of the records and so forth. But we didn't know exactly how to begin with, because it's a huge task. So we asked our consultant for some guidance, because we looked a bit on the internet, but we didn't find concrete help. So they did for us a study. They reviewed the grey and the published literature, and they conducted about 20. They conducted 20 interviews with leading organizations in web archiving domain, and they came up with a report. And by asking that, we had 2 surprises. The first one was when we asked them the question, they said, "Oh, it's not such a common approach. And then the second surprise was when they came up with the results and they say, you know, we had the same reaction by all the interviewees. They said it's not so common. So they suggested that we make a presentation, and that's why I'm here. So second chapter, some words about the Publications Office, so you know a bit our profile. The Publications Office is an EU institution that is at the service of the other institutions, bodies and agencies. So our mission relies on 4 pillars. We have to produce the publications authored by the EU institutions. We have to give access to those publications. We need to ensure the reuse of all the information, data sets and information published. And we need to archive for the long term what has been published. In order to do that, the Publications Office runs a portal, so the Publications Office of the European Union, so you see the logo there, and it covers many websites that cover a lot of topics. It covers EU law, tenders, EU general publications, results of research funded by the EU, the organization chart of the EU, European data sets produced by the EU institutions, but also by the member states. And the Publications Office produces also some things that are for reuse. Those are the reference data that we use to run our websites. And last but not least, we have also a website with our EU Web Archive, because as our data is open, our Web Archive website is also open. So how are we organized? We have an Archivit account, so we rely on a contractor. Internet Archive put at our disposal the tools to crawl regularly the europa.eu domain, and at the same time put at our disposal all its IT organization to render those websites. And what we want to achieve in this project is take the ARC and WARC files and put them in our long-term preservation system. This is a slide about our activity, or what we want to preserve. You see in green all the legacy, so those are mainly ARC files. That we crawled with various contractors, and in blue what we are archiving with the Internet Archive. The dark blue is the broad crawl, so the europa.eu domain, and the light blue are topical or selective crawls that can cover other websites. But you see that we have a global amount of 60 tera, which is small if you compare it to Internet Archive, but for us it's already a lot. Because it's more than what we have actually in our long-term preservation. So this slide shows you how we are organized, because we preserve publications, and we preserve them with the FRBR structure. So each title is a work, and for each one we have all the linguistic versions that are the expressions, and for each language the different formats, mainly PDF, HTML or XML, it depends. And we don't have the web archiving files, and of course the WARC files won't fit into this structure, so we will have to create a new collection. So this gives an overview of the formats that we have. We have mainly XML files because we have a lot of legal texts, so they are in structured format. PDFs, of course, for the general publications and the legal text. And the TIFF files are the result of the digitization of all our paper collection. So now the third chapter about the various aspects of the web preservation and the questions that we asked ourselves. The ARC and WARC files are specific digital objects, as it has been widely commented today. They are like bags that contain other formats. And this makes of them very specific digital objects, so we cannot treat them like all the others. So the questions that we were asking ourselves were about the format themselves, so ARC, WARC, what is the difference, should we convert them? About the compression, because those are compressed files, so zipped files. What should we do with all the formats that are embedded? How should we model the AIPs, the archival packages? What about the metadata? And finally, you spoke about context. What should we archive as a context? So first question, the ARC and the and WARC files. So our goal was to have a clean and consistent collection on which we can apply the same tools. So our consultant gave us the result of what the various members of the community told them. And it appears that the experience among them is that usually the conversion is not done. So why? There are good reasons for migrating, but even better for not migrating. The reasons for migrating the ARC to WARC files, the first one would be, okay, we have the same format for all the collection, so the process of creating derivatives will be easier. A second is that ARC files are not so easy to index, so it would make simpler the indexing. And a third one is that the ARC files are not incremental. You saw that they are more teras of ARC than WARC, even if there are less websites or crawls inside them. But the reasons for not migrating are, first of all, that an ARC file should be considered as a record. So if it's the preservation copy, it shouldn't be touched, it shouldn't be modified. So if we want to preserve the integrity, we shouldn't modify them. And an important reason also is that all the tools that are today accessible are still working on ARC and WARC files, so there is really no emergency to convert them. And a third reason is that it's an IT process that is very intensive. So the recommendation was quite obvious. There is no haste, just migrate the ARC as they are. Ingest the ARCs as they are, and yes, you can do that after if you want, and they gave us the name of an open source methodology and tool to do it if we wanted to do it. The second question was about the compression. So usually long-term preservation says that zipped files are not recommended, and they should even be avoided, or if we need to preserve them, we should characterize all the files that are embedded. So we asked, so the experience of the community shows that the compression is widely used, but that it's usually part of the production process. So Internet Archive delivers its WARC files already compressed, so it's a common use. The reasons for keeping the compressing is that GZ is a lossless compression, so we don't lose any information. It's allowed by the WARC specifications, so it's not compulsory, but it's allowed, so why don't doing it? Because it gives significant storage savings, and it still allows random access to the individual WARC parts, so the WARC records. We asked also if there was any impact on processing, and they said that on the search access performance there was no problem, and the characterization was not impacted either. The only caveat that one of the interviewed institutions said is that if you perform the compression after the production process, then you are obliged to recalculate all the external indices and adapt the metadata that reference the file names. So it's a huge work. The recommendation is quite straightforward. So store the compressed ARCs and WARC files and consider compressing even the ARC files and reindex them before ingestion. The third question was about the characterization of the WARC embedded files. So we understand that we should ingest them like that, but as we know also that the characterization is computationally very intense, our concern was if there are any issues if we perform that step after the ingestion. And there our consultant led the interviews having in mind that the characterization is a 4-stage process. So they say that the first one is the identification, so it's the fact that you don't open the embedded files, but you just guess their format from usually the extension. The second is the characterization itself. So you open the file and you look into some bits in order to see what format they are. The third one is the validation. So there you see if the format, if the file claiming having a specific format is conform to the specifications of this format. And the last stage is the assessment. So it's the assessment of the risk linked to this. Is the assessment linked to the risk linked to this format. All those three, the 4 stages require a growing intervention of the human and less computer power. So it's a balance to find. The experience among the community is that a tip that was given is that at a minimum it's important to examine the MIME types from the CDX files. If you have time, you can launch Drawit and analyze the Drawit reports. And then, what do you do if there are problems? At least document the issue, and if you render the files, if you run yourself the web archiving website, then you need to either migrate, but it's not usually done. It's more the emulation that is chosen. So the recommendation was to conduct this stage, the 4 steps of the characterization, and to do that at our pace, according our planning purposes. The modeling of the AIP. as newcomers to web archiving, we were a bit puzzled because it's quite complex. You have, on the one hand, the live websites. There are many, and on the other hand, you have the crawls. A same crawl can capture many websites. A same crawl can be composed of many WARC files. There are links between WARC files because they can be incremental. The crawls can be done over time, so repeated over time. So our question, okay, what is the intellectual entity that we should preserve? Is it the seed, the job crawl? Should we include the patchwork crawls into the AIPs? So, and also, is there any size limit? The answers are interesting. So concerning the AIP granularity, there is a consensus. So it should be the job, the crawl. But concerning the content, of course, at least the arc of the WARC files of the same crawl. But what should be the accompanying files? There was no consensus. So some say the associated CDX files. Some speak about the crawl logs, error logs, of course, yeah, the premise events, current contract, but usually they don't put the indices that are built for the access because they can be rebuilt. Concerning the AIP size, it seems that it depends on the long-term preservation system that you're using, because it has been reported that Rosetta, Preservica, and some homemade systems have a limit about the AIP. We are lucky with RODA that we use, there is no technical limit. Concerning the long-term preservation systems, we see that few organizations have a long-term preservation system conform to OIAS. And if they organize the access, they make a clear difference between the preservation copy and the access copy. So nearly all do preservation by bit preservation, with usually storage on dedicated servers and multiple copies. Some say, okay, but the extra copy is at Internet Archive, but more than that is very depending on the institutions. So recommendation, yes, intellectual entity, use, well, they advise ERKIP that we already use, and the access on a different server. So for the metadata, we identified three purposes for metadata. The long-term preservation ones, so descriptive for future generations. The ones for discovery, but they depend on the environment where you put them, because if it's within the web archive, they have their own structure. If it's on our portal, they will be different. And all the metadata for the access and the rendering are also another chapter. So what does our consultant say? So for the long-term preservation actions, many metadata, especially provenance and technical, are already within the WARC files. Concerning discovery, we see that the descriptive metadata are put mainly at the level of the seed, but it's easier to do it on selective crawls than on main broad crawls. So it's usually the selective seeds that are put in the catalogs of libraries. Of course, there are a lot of metadata on the web archive site, but if you want to attract people to this site, you need to, put metadata on them on other sites. So I will try to go faster. The last question was about the archival representation information, which is the most complicated, because if we want to put information so that future generations understand the ARC and WARC files later, we need to put a lot of information. So it's a wish list. So the expected documentation is about the file structure, the various softwares used to harvest, view, or emulate the files. The big chapter is the embedded files. We should all describe them. And then harvesting and preservation contracts, if we do it with an external contractor, because it gives interesting information about the processes, and also the screenshots of the live website, because it helps to render or to verify the quality over time. So what are the lessons we learned from that? First of all, we know the ARC and WARC files are challenging objects because they are complex. So the embedded files need to be characterized, and it takes a lot of resources. And they are captured objects, so we don't choose them. So it's impossible to fix a policy like we do with other formats, and where we can orient a bit what we get. The bit preservation is an important step, but there is still a huge need for harmonization in the AIP structure. We would like a better support about the ARC and WARC files in the long-term digital preservation systems, and more documentation about the archival representation information. More tools would be also welcome. The survey showed that the harvest, we still have this problem with the interactive pages. So web browsed crawlers would be welcome. Takedown requests, also extraction of metadata, tools about that would help us. For us, the next steps are, it's the last slide. Just we have to implement our web preservation workflow, and we are happy to discuss about them.